She sat at her own baby shower and watched her mother-in-law pick up every single gift. The handmade blankets, the tiny shoes, the quilt sewn with someone's bare hands, and drop them, one by one, into a black trash bag. 22 women watched. Not one of them said a word. Her husband stood by the door and stared at the wall. And she, 8 months pregnant, hands folded over her belly, gold bracelet catching the light. She did not cry. She did not stand up. She did not say a single thing, because she already knew something no one in that room knew. She had known it since that morning, when her phone buzzed once against the white tablecloth, and she chose not to reach for it. She already knew that the building they were standing in, the chandeliers, the catered tables, the whole elegant room, would have her name on the deed before the week was out. She already knew that the family dismissing her daughter before she was even born had no idea they were doing it inside property that belonged to that little girl already. She had spent 11 years building something so quietly that the people closest to her never heard a sound, and she was about to walk into the room where they held their most important business event of the year, and she was going to let the number speak for itself. $55 billion. Stay with me, because what happens next is going to change the way you think about every quiet woman you have ever underestimated. The lesson this story carries is simple, and it will stay with you long after it ends. The most powerful thing a woman can build is something no one saw coming, because she built it while everyone was busy deciding she wasn't enough. If that sentence just landed somewhere real for you, if you have ever been in a room where someone decided your worth before you had a chance to show it, you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, and share this with one woman in your life who needs to hear it today. Every week we tell stories like this one. Stories of women who built in the quiet, who healed without an audience, and who showed up one day transformed. Leave a comment below and tell us. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what you were carrying? We read every single one.
The baby shower was supposed to be beautiful, and for the first 40 minutes, it was. Eleanor Hartwell, everyone who loved her called her Ellie, sat at the center of a long table draped in white linen, her hands folded over the round curve of her belly, her gold bracelet catching the afternoon light every time she turned her head to smile at someone. She was 8 months along. Her dress was a soft cream color, simple and clean, the kind of dress that doesn't try too hard because it doesn't need to. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely. She looked exactly the way a woman looks when she has decided, quietly and firmly, that this afternoon is going to be beautiful no matter what. She had been making decisions like that for a long time. 22 women had come to celebrate. They wore their good dresses and brought carefully wrapped gifts and talked to each other in that particular soft way people talk when they are trying to make something feel special. Ellie's college roommate had flown in from Denver. Her coworker from the firm had brought a handmade quilt she had stayed up 3 weekends finishing. Her neighbor had brought a wicker basket filled with tiny things: soft socks, a white knit hat, a small stuffed rabbit with one slightly lopsided ear that somehow made it more endearing rather than less. The gifts were stacked or stun on a separate table to Ellie's left. Pink blankets with satin edges, pale yellow onesies, a set of board books arranged in a little fan, a mobile with hand-painted wooden birds that turned slowly when you touched them. And near the bottom of the pile, wrapped carefully in brown paper and tied with a piece of kitchen twine, a small package that Ellie had brought herself that morning from the top drawer of her nightstand. It was a thin gold bracelet, her grandmother Ruth's, the one Ellie had worn for 15 years without taking off until her belly had grown too round to let it sit comfortably at her wrist. She had wrapped it herself and placed it with the other gifts because she wanted to give it to her daughter the right way. Formally, at a celebration, the way Ruth had given it to her. The hall smelled like eucalyptus and warm candle wax. Soft music played from a Bluetooth speaker someone had tucked behind the floral arrangement. Someone made a joke about hospital bag checklists, and everyone laughed and someone else offered to refill the sparkling water, and the afternoon felt, for those 40 minutes, like exactly what it was supposed to be. Then Margaret Whitmore stood up. Ellie's mother-in-law was 62 years old, tall, sharp-eyed, with the particular posture of a woman who had spent her entire life expecting rooms to rearrange themselves around her arrival. She wore a cream blazer and a gold brooch near her collar. The larger one, Ellie noted, the one she reserved for occasions she considered important. She moved toward the gift table, the way a judge moves toward a bench. Like the decision had already been made before she got there. She picked up the first gift without reading the tag. It was one of the pink blankets. She held it for exactly 1 second, her lips pressed together, and then she dropped it into the black trash bag she had brought from the kitchen. The room went still, not loudly, not with gasps or exclamations, just still. The way a room goes the still when something happens that everyone understands, but no one is willing to name. Margaret reached for the next gift, the tiny white socks with lace trim, into the bag, the pale yellow onesies, the cream-colored sleeper with the little buttons shaped like stars, the stuffed rabbit with the lopsided ear. One after another, she worked through the table with the calm efficiency of a woman doing a chore she had already mentally completed before she arrived. "This family needs a son," she said, to no one in particular, in the tone of a woman announcing the weather. "A daughter cannot carry the Whitmore name forward. All of this pink is a waste. I'm doing everyone a favor." Nobody said a word. 22 women sat with their hands in their laps and their eyes somewhere between the floor and the tablecloth and the space just past Ellie's left shoulder. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them stood up. They sat in the particular silence of people who know something is wrong but have decided it is not their wrong to correct. James stood near the door with his arms folded and his jaw set. He was wearing a dark shirt and slacks, dressed like a man who had come to endure an afternoon rather than participate in one. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at Ellie. He found a point somewhere near the window and fixed his gaze on it, and said nothing. From the corner of the room, in a chair she had positioned at the edge of things, as though she was still deciding whether to stay, Caroline Ashford laughed. It was a short sound, soft and pointed at the same time, like a pin dropping on marble. "Some women," Caroline said, smoothing the front of her green dress with one hand, "just aren't built for certain families." No one responded to that either. Ellie looked at Caroline for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at James. Then she looked at her hands folded over her belly, and she took one long, quiet breath. She did not cry. She did not stand up. She did not say the things that were rising in her chest with the pressure of water behind a dam. She had too much dignity for the room she was sitting in, and she knew it. And that knowing was the only thing keeping her upright. Near the bottom of the gift pile, Margaret's hand closed around the small package, wrapped in brown paper and twine. She didn't look at it. It went into the trash bag with everything else. Ellie watched it disappear. On the table beside her, face down, her phone buzzed once, a single notification pulsing silently against the white linen. She didn't reach for it. She already knew what it said. She had been waiting for that message since early that morning, and now that it had arrived, she felt something settle in her chest, something quiet, something certain, like the last piece of a very large structure locking into place. She picked up her glass of water and took a small sip. She smiled at the woman across from her, who hadn't done anything wrong, and she stayed. 15 years before the baby shower, on a wooden porch outside a small town in eastern Tennessee, summer was doing what summer does in that part of the world, sitting heavy and golden on everything, making the air smell like cut grass and warm earth and the particular sweetness that comes just before the sun gives up for the day. Ellie was 19 years old. She was sitting on the top porch step with her knees pulled up and her chin resting on her folded arms, watching the fireflies begin their slow blink across the yard. Beside her, in the old rocking chair that had been on that porch since before Ellie was born, sat her grandmother, Ruth. Ruth Hartwell was a small woman with silver hair and hands that had worked their whole lives and showed it. Hands that had sewn her family's clothes and kept her house and folded themselves in prayer every morning since she was a girl. She was holding something between two fingers, a gold bracelet, thin and simple, the kind of thing that didn't announce itself. She took Ellie's hand, without asking, the way grandmothers do, and pressed the bracelet into her palm and closed Ellie's fingers around it. "Don't take this off," Ruth said, "until you've built something that can't be taken from you." Her voice was quiet, but it had weight to it. The kind of weight that comes from having lived long enough to mean everything you say. "Not love," she continued. "Not a man, not somebody's approval of what you're worth. Something yours, baby, you hear me?" Ellie nodded the way 19-year-olds nod when they are listening, but don't fully understand yet. She put the bracelet on. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for that exact wrist. She held her arm up and watched it catch the last orange light of the evening. She would wear it for the next 15 years without ever taking it off. What Ellie didn't fully understand that evening, what would take her years to appreciate, was what her grandmother had been doing quietly for decades, while everyone else was busy making noise. Ruth Hartwell had cleaned other people's houses for 35 years. She had ironed other people's shirts and scrubbed other people's floors and folded other people's laundry before the sun came up and after it went down. She had done it without complaint and without the expectation that anyone would notice, because she had a different plan for her attention. She had been buying land, parcel by parcel, acre by acre, small pieces of Tennessee farmland that nobody else was paying attention to, purchased carefully over 3.5 decades with money saved from work that paid almost nothing, supplemented by a trust and understanding that property was the only thing that held its value through everything else. She never talked about it. It wasn't the kind of thing she discussed. She simply kept buying, kept paying the taxes, kept the documents in a metal lockbox under her bed, and waited. When Ruth died quietly in her sleep during Ellie's sophomore year of college, she left behind something no one in the family had understood the full weight of. The land, all of it, was in a trust. Ellie's name was the one inside it. Ellie didn't touch it immediately. She was 20 years old and grieving and not ready. She spent 3 more years finishing her architecture degree and then building her career from the ground up. Learning the industry from the inside, understanding development and acquisition, and the particular patience required to do things at the right scale at the right time. Then, carefully and without announcing herself, she began. She never told James. She wanted to be honest about the reason. She had watched what money did to the temperature of a relationship. She had seen women she respected loved warmly and openly until the number came out, and then watched the warmth shift into something cooler and more calculated. She didn't want to be managed. She wanted to be loved. And she loved James in those early years, genuinely, with her whole heart. He was funny and charming, and he looked at her like she was the most interesting person in any room. She wanted that look to be about her, just her. So she kept the portfolio in her name and her name alone and managed it the way she managed everything, carefully, brilliantly, from a place of deep quiet. She loved her husband. She just loved herself more carefully. And there was one other thing she had done that even Daniel, her attorney, had called inspired in that dry way of his that served as his highest form of praise. 4 years into their marriage, Ellie had purchased a commercial real estate property on the east side of the city, an apartment she kept and maintained and never mentioned. Not because she planned to use it, because she understood, at some instinctive level she couldn't fully articulate, that a woman should always have a door she can open on her own terms. It had east-facing windows. She had always loved waking up in the light. The morning after Ruth pressed that bracelet into a 19-year-old girl's palm on a Tennessee porch, Ellie sat on her college dormitory bed and looked at it on her wrist for a long time. She thought about what her grandmother had said. She thought about the word built, not earned, not received, not hoped for. Built. There was a difference. She felt it even then, before she fully understood it. She went to class, she sat in the front row, she took notes on everything, she started building. The ride home from the baby shower was 22 minutes long. Ellie counted. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded over her belly and watched the Connecticut suburbs move past the window. The tidy lawns, the minivans and driveways, the occasional burst of a rose bush someone had planted beside a mailbox. Everything perfectly ordinary. Everything completely untouched by what had just happened in that hall. James drove with one hand on the wheel and his elbow resting on the door. The radio was on. A sports station, men discussing a game with the practiced urgency of people paid to make everything sound like it matters. Neither of them turned it off. Neither of them spoke. She waited. She was good at waiting. He pulled into the garage and cut the engine and sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. She thought he was going to say something. She gave him every second of space to say it. She sat and she waited, and she gave him every opportunity to be the man she had married 8 years ago in a small church in Nashville, with her parents crying in the third row and the summer light coming through the stained glass like something planned. He got out of the car and went inside and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter looking at his phone. That was the night Ellie understood. The silence was not temporary. She went upstairs. She ran a bath. She sat in it for 20 minutes with the lights low and her hands on her belly, and she talked to her daughter in the quiet interior voice she had been using since the 5th month, the voice that didn't need words to make itself understood. Then she got out. She dried off. She put on her pajamas. She went to bed. She did not cry that night. She was saving that for when it would mean something. The weeks that followed were slow and heavy in the way that a particular kind of heartbreak makes time feel. James came home late 3 nights that week. The Henderson account, the Meridian project, his boss was breathing down his neck. He said all the things a man says when the truth is something else entirely, and he said them with the practiced fluency of someone who had been rehearsing. On a Thursday afternoon, Ellie was in the front hall closet looking for the gray cardigan she had been thinking about all morning. James's jacket was hanging near the back, the charcoal one he'd worn to dinner last Tuesday. She moved it aside to reach the cardigan and felt the slight added weight of something in the breast pocket. She reached in. A receipt. Folded in half, a restaurant on the west side of the city. A steakhouse she knew by name, the kind of place where the candles on the tables are real and the bread comes in a basket and the bill arrives in a leather folder. She opened it. Dinner for two. 3 courses. A bottle of wine. The total was $263. Last Tuesday, James had told her he was working late. He'd come home at 10:15 and eaten the dinner she'd kept warm and told her the Henderson account was a nightmare. Ellie held the receipt for a long moment. She looked at the date. She looked at the total. She thought about the Henderson account and the particular way James had described it, with just enough specific detail to sound like someone who had actually been there. Then she folded it back exactly as she had found it. Set it back in the breast pocket, hung the jacket where it had been, found her cardigan. She was not ready to use that yet. Margaret called every morning, sometimes twice. The calls were framed with maternal warmth, soft, concerned, the texture of a woman who loved her son and wished only the best for his young family. But inside the concern, if you listened carefully, were instructions. Ellie had become very good at listening carefully. Maybe Ellie should consider a different hospital, one that Margaret's personal physician recommended, one that was better equipped for complicated deliveries. Had Ellie been getting enough rest? James mentioned she seemed stressed. Sleep on your left side, dear, not your right. It's better for the baby's circulation. There was a recipe for a broth, very good for late pregnancy. Margaret would send it over. And then, after several days of careful building, perhaps just preliminary, and just to be safe, Ellie should sit down with the family attorney, just to make sure all the proper documents were in order. For the baby, everything for the baby. Yes, Ellie would say, I'll think about it. And then she would end the call and stand in her kitchen and breathe. One Sunday, Carolyn was at dinner again. She had been appearing at their table with increasing frequency. Every other week at first, then every week as though she had always been there. She always brought something. A bottle of wine, a tart from the French bakery on 5th, once a small potted orchid that she set on the counter with the ease of a woman who already knew where it would look best. She and James had a language. Ellie had noticed it developing over the months, the way you notice a season changing. Gradually, and then all at once, inside references, shared laughter about things that had happened when Ellie wasn't in the room, a particular ease that exists between two people who have been spending time together without a witness. Caroline was careful. She was never overtly inappropriate. She was simply, persistently, deliberately there. That particular Sunday, Ellie was in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on a roast chicken, the kind that takes 3 hours and makes the whole house smell like rosemary and garlic and something that resembles a home. She was reaching for the serving platter when she heard it through the gap in the kitchen door. Caroline's voice, low and measured and perfectly aimed. She's not what this family needs, James. You know that. Somewhere in you, you've always known. A pause. Then James, quiet, flat. One word. Yeah. Ellie set the serving platter down carefully. She stood at the stove with her back straight and her hands steady. She finished the chicken. She adjusted the herbs on top. She wiped her hands on the dish towel. She carried the platter to the table. She set it down. She sat. She unfolded her napkin. She passed the bread when someone asked. That night, after the dishes were done and James had disappeared into his office with his laptop and Caroline had said her charming goodbyes and driven away in her silver car, Ellie went to the nursery. She had painted it herself 4 months ago, on a Saturday, when James was at a conference and the house was hers. She had chosen the color carefully from a sample strip she'd taped to the wall and lived with for 3 days first. A soft, warm, sage green, the color of leaves in early spring when everything is still new and not quite sure of itself. She had moved all the furniture to the center of the room, covered it with drop cloths, and spent 11 hours painting every wall, cutting in the edges by hand, doing it twice where the coverage wasn't quite right. There was a crib against the east wall with a mobile above it. Hand-painted wooden birds on thin wire, the kind that turned slowly in even the lightest air. She had assembled the crib herself using a YouTube tutorial and a Phillips head screwdriver, and it had taken 2.5 hours and 1 moment of truly profound frustration before it clicked into something solid and trustworthy. There was a small bookshelf with picture books lined up by size. There was a changing table with the basket of supplies organized exactly as she wanted them. And there was, in the corner by the window, a rocking chair. She had found it at an estate sale 3 towns over, old, worn, with a cushion that had seen better decades. She had reupholstered it herself over 2 weekends, covering the old fabric with something soft and cream-colored and right. She sat in it now in the dark. She had gone to Margaret's trash bag the morning after the baby shower, quietly, before anyone was awake. She had found it in the garage, tied at the top, waiting for the bin pickup that wasn't until Thursday. She had opened it and found the gold bracelet near the top, wrapped still in its brown paper and twine. She had taken it out. She had cleaned it with a soft cloth and warm water. She had set it on her nightstand. She held it now in her palm in the dark, both hands pressed over her belly where her daughter was turning slowly, that deep, deliberate movement that babies make in the still hours when everything else has gone quiet and the whole world contracts to the size of a heartbeat. Ellie cried. She cried without making a sound, the way she had taught herself years ago. In dormitory rooms with thin walls, in bathroom stalls before presentations, in parked cars, in hospital parking lots when Ruth died, and she had a final exam the next morning, and both things were equally true. The kind of crying that stays inside the body, that doesn't ask anything from anyone, that finishes itself and leaves you with clear eyes and a straight back by morning. She cried, and then she stopped. She looked at the crib. She looked at the mobile. The birds, suspended in the dark, still now, waiting for air. She thought about her grandmother's hands. She thought about the porch in Tennessee, and the rocking chair, and the orange evening sky, and the weight of a bracelet being pressed into a 19-year-old girl's palm by someone who believed in her without needing to explain all the reasons why. She thought about everything she had built, the years of it, the patience of it, the particular discipline of building something enormous while making no noise about it. She had built something that couldn't be taken. She just needed one more step. The next morning, while the coffee was still brewing, Ellie took out her laptop and opened a document she had been updating for 18 months. It was a spreadsheet that looked to anyone unfamiliar with its contents like a completely ordinary project timeline. To Ellie, it was the final architecture of something she had been designing for over a decade. She reviewed the numbers one more time, not because she needed to. She knew them the way she knew her own heartbeat, but because she wanted to feel them with the full weight of what they meant. $55 billion, the Meridian real estate portfolio. The largest privately held commercial real estate acquisition in the state's recorded history. A collection of properties, office towers, mixed-use developments, hotel properties that had been assembled quietly over 11 years through a series of smaller acquisitions, each one careful, each one timed, each one building toward a threshold that only Ellie had been able to see. The lead name on the contract was hers. She closed the laptop, she put the bracelet on, she went downstairs and poured her coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the light come up over the backyard. And she thought about one thing her grandmother had said that she hadn't fully understood until right now. Not until you've built something that can't be taken. She had built it. Now it was time to let it speak. The first catastrophe arrived with James's coffee. He came downstairs on a Tuesday morning in the third week after the baby shower, the third week of late nights and sports, radio, silences, and the particular performance of normalcy that both of them had been maintaining with the exhausted precision of people who know the structure is compromised but haven't yet decided who is going to say so first. He poured his coffee. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. He folded his hands around his mug, and he spoke in the level, rehearsed voice of a man delivering a conclusion rather than opening a conversation. His mother thought, and he agreed, he said, and he wanted Ellie to understand he was saying this from a place of genuine care for her well-being and for the baby. His mother thought it would be better for everyone if Ellie spent the remaining weeks of her pregnancy at her parents' house in Tennessee. For the support, for the peace and quiet, less stress on the household, less stress on the household. He said it the way you say it, when you mean less inconvenience for me. But you haven't found the correct vocabulary for that yet. He said his mother had already spoken to her doctor about the arrangements. He said it like it was settled. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug and looked at the table. Ellie looked at him across the breakfast table. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he shifted slightly in his seat, the small involuntary movement of a man who has just discovered the ground beneath his chair is less solid than he believed. Then she nodded. She went upstairs. The second catastrophe arrived 90 minutes later in the form of an email from her project manager, a woman named Sarah Coleman, who had worked with Ellie for 4 years, who Ellie had hired directly out of graduate school, who Ellie had trained and championed and trusted with the operational details of projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The email was professional, thoughtful even. It expressed gratitude. It cited personal reasons and a desire for a new direction. It gave the standard 2 weeks' notice with an offer to help with the transition. The new employer was listed at the bottom, a development firm that Ellie had never heard of. She forwarded the email to Daniel Shaw with a single line. Can you find out who owns that firm? Daniel's reply came back in 11 minutes. One sentence. It's a shell company with registered ties to the Whitmore family attorney's firm. Ellie sat with that for a moment. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and looked out the window. The third catastrophe arrived at 2:17 that afternoon. Her obstetrician called personally, not through the office line, but on Ellie's cell. Her name was Dr. Patricia Wells, and she had delivered approximately 2,400 babies over the course of her career, and had seen most of what the experience of pregnancy could throw at a woman and a family, which is perhaps why her voice, when Ellie answered, was so carefully, deliberately steady. She said she wanted Ellie to be aware of something. She said she had received a voicemail from a woman identifying herself as Margaret Whitmore, James's mother, expressing concern about Ellie's emotional stability and requesting that Dr. Wells conduct a psychological evaluation before the delivery. A pause. I want you to know, Dr. Wells said, that I have delivered 2,400 babies. I have seen everything this process can produce. I am not conducting that evaluation, but I felt you should be informed. Ellie thanked her. She hung up. She walked to the bathroom. She sat down on the cool tile floor with her back against the tub and her knees as close to her chest as her belly would allow. She stayed there for 4 minutes. She counted them. Then she stood up. She went to the bedroom. She sat at the desk. She opened her laptop. She scrolled to Daniel Shaw's number and pressed call and waited exactly 1.5 rings. "Move forward with the acquisition," she said when he answered. Her voice was calm and clean, the voice of someone who has moved past the place where the damage lives and arrived at the place where decisions get made. "All of it, full closure by Friday. I don't want to wait anymore." A 2-second pause on Daniel's end, then, "All of it, Friday." "Understood." Another pause. "Should I be concerned about anything on your end?" "No," Ellie said. "Everything is exactly as it should be." She closed the laptop. She looked at the bracelet on the nightstand where she had set it that morning. She put it on. Then she did something she had not done in weeks. She called her mother. Linda Hartwell answered on the second ring the way mothers answer when they have been waiting for a call they didn't know they were expecting. Ellie didn't tell her everything. She told her enough. She told her that she needed her to come, that the baby was coming soon, that she wanted her mother in the room. Linda said, "I'll put Frank on the highway tomorrow morning." Ellie said, "Thank you, Mom." She stayed on the phone for 6 more minutes, listening to her mother talk about the drive and the rest stop on the interstate and whether Frank's car would make it without an oil change. She didn't say anything significant about any of it. She just listened. She needed to hear her mother's voice, doing ordinary things. When she hung up, she went to the nursery. She sat in the rocking chair. She looked at the birds on the mobile, still in the afternoon quiet. She stayed there until she was ready. 10 days before the catastrophes, there had been a moment when Ellie thought it might be over in a different way. She had asked James to sit down. They were in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, the house quiet, no Caroline, no phone calls from Margaret, just the two of them and the particular heavy air of a conversation that had been circling for weeks, waiting for someone to land it. Ellie sat across from him at the table, and she looked at him steadily, and she said, "I know about the receipt. I know what you said to Caroline. I need you to tell me the truth about what is happening." Something broke open in James's face. It was sudden and real. The kind of breaking that cannot be performed because it involves the collapse of the scaffolding a person has been holding up with both hands for months. He cried. He said he was sorry. He said he had gotten lost in his mother's opinions and Caroline's attention, in the particular vanity of a man who had been made to feel insufficient in his own home for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. He said he loved Ellie. He said he wanted to fix it. He said he would cut off all contact with Caroline immediately, and he meant it. Ellie watched him cry with a stillness that surprised her. She felt something, but it wasn't the relief she expected. It was something more like clarity. The clear, cold water of a truth she had been standing next to for months finally touching her feet. But she said, "Okay, show me." For 2 weeks, he tried. He was home by 6 every evening. He cooked dinner twice. He asked about her projects with the specific interest of a man making an effort. Caroline stopped coming to Sunday dinner. Margaret's calls became shorter, more careful. The house felt, in those 2 weeks, like something that was trying to heal. Ellie was cautious. She was not restored, but she was watching. Then she went to the car one afternoon, looking for her sunglasses. They were not in the glove box. But something else was. A second phone. Black, slim, tucked under the registration documents with the particular casualness of something hidden by someone who had stopped believing they needed to hide it very carefully. Ellie picked it up. It was not locked. She looked at the messages for 9 minutes, sitting in the passenger seat of her own car in her own driveway. 311 messages to Caroline, the most recent timestamp. 11:47 p.m., the same night James had cried at the kitchen table and said he was sorry, and meant it. She set the phone back exactly where it had been. She went inside. She put the kettle on. She made herself a cup of tea. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the backyard, thinking about her grandmother, buying land no one was paying attention to for 35 years, while everyone else was busy making noise. Then she called Daniel. Not about the phone, not yet, about the acquisition timeline. She wanted to know if Friday was realistic. He said it was going to require an unusual amount of coffee from his end, but yes. She said good. She said, make it happen. The second false victory came from a direction Ellie had not expected. Margaret called on a Wednesday and asked in a voice calibrated to approximately 3 degrees warmer than her usual register whether Ellie might like to have lunch. Just the two of them, at the Italian place near the park, the one with the good bread and the private corner tables. Ellie said yes, because she was curious. Over pasta and sparkling water, Margaret softened in a way that Ellie found simultaneously moving and slightly suspicious, the way you feel when a very complicated piece of machinery begins operating more smoothly than you have ever seen it operate before. She said she had been too hard. She said she wanted to be the grandmother this little girl deserved. She used the word misunderstanding once, carefully, the way you use a fragile dish. Ellie left the lunch feeling lighter. Not warm, exactly, not restored, but lighter. Like perhaps there was a version of this that didn't have to end in complete destruction. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the Whitmore family attorney. Margaret had filed a petition for a formal asset review of the marriage, citing financial opacity and requesting full disclosure of all of Ellie's personal holdings, accounts, and property interests. The lunch had been reconnaissance. Ellie sat at the kitchen island and read the letter twice. And then she did something that surprised her. She laughed. A short, real, entirely genuine laugh. The kind that comes from the part of you that has moved past hurt and arrived at something almost like admiration for the audacity. She's good, Ellie said to the empty kitchen. I'll give her that. She called Daniel. He picked up, listened to her describe the letter, and was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, in the measured tone of a man exercising significant restraint, did you happen to take anything to that lunch? A purse? Keys? Because I'd like to just confirm you still legally own those. Ellie laughed again, twice in one day. She hadn't done that in weeks. Yes, Daniel, she said. My purse is still mine. Good, he said. Let's make sure it stays that way. I'll draft the response this afternoon. The Whitmore family held their annual business gala on the 3rd Saturday of every month, a tradition James's family maintained with the seriousness of a religious observance. It was held in a ballroom on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand Hotel, a fact that Ellie had always noted with a private appreciation for what she could only describe as the particular poetry of timing. James had told his family Ellie was at home, resting. He said it casually to several people during the cocktail hour, the easy dismissal of a man who has decided a narrative and isn't expecting it to be questioned. He was relaxed that evening. His jacket was open, drink in hand, moving through the room with the fluid ease of someone who has decided he is doing fine. Margaret was there in a black dress with a gold brooch. A different one from the baby shower, larger, the statement piece she reserved for occasions she wanted people to notice her at. Her head was slightly elevated, surveying the room with the satisfaction of a woman who believed she had successfully managed a situation. Caroline was beside her, in deep emerald green, laughing at something that hadn't quite been said yet, her hand resting occasionally on Margaret's arm, in the familiar way of women who have been conspiring comfortably together for long enough that they've stopped feeling conspiratorial about it. The evening moved along. A live jazz quartet played something smooth and low. The dinner service was elegant. The business presentation segment was about to begin. A projector screen had been set up at the far end of the ballroom, a microphone adjusted at the podium. That was when the double doors opened, not loudly. There was no dramatic push, no theatrical pause. The doors opened the way doors open when the person on the other side is not trying to impress anyone. They simply opened, and Ellie walked in. She was wearing deep burgundy, a dress that moved with her and understood the shape she was carrying, that made her pregnancy look like exactly what it was. The presence of something powerful preparing to enter the world. Her hair was pulled back simply. Her shoulders were back. The gold bracelet caught the chandelier light at her wrist with a warm, quiet flash. She was not alone. Daniel Shaw walked one step behind and to her left, carrying a leather portfolio with the calm of a man who has seen most things and is not easily moved by any of them. On either side of them, two senior partners from the firm flanked their position, men in dark suits who moved with the particular stillness of people who don't need to announce themselves because their presence always does it for them. Ellie walked through the ballroom the way her grandmother had walked through any room she ever entered, without urgency, without aggression, without the need to perform anything, simply present, fully, completely present. The room noticed, not all at once, not for any single obvious reason. It happened the way weather changes, gradually and then completely. Conversation slowed, heads turned. People who had been holding drinks lowered them slightly. The band continued to play, but somehow seemed quieter. Margaret saw her first. Her face didn't fall dramatically. It tightened, the precise tightening of a woman who has been certain something was handled and is now understanding that it is not. Diana, Caroline, went still in the middle of a sentence and did not finish it. James turned from the bar. He looked at his wife, at her belly, at her posture, at the attorneys flanking her, at the bracelet on her wrist, and the drink in his hand seemed, somehow, to become heavier. Ellie walked to the center of the room where the microphone had been set up for the business presentation. She looked at the event host, a man she had met twice at previous gatherings, and took the microphone from his hand with the quiet confidence of someone to whom it had always been going to be given, even if no one had known that yet. "I apologize for the interruption," she said. Her voice carried easily through the room because she was not straining and she was not performing. She was simply speaking clearly, the way a woman speaks when she has been quiet for a long time and has chosen her moment. "This is a family business event. What I have to share belongs here." She nodded once to Daniel. He stepped forward, opened the leather portfolio, and laid a single document flat on the nearest table. He stepped back. "2 weeks ago," Ellie said, "I finalized the acquisition of the Meridian real estate portfolio." She did not rush. She did not look at anyone's face to measure their reaction. She was not here for their reactions. $55 billion. The transaction closed on a Friday morning. My attorney can confirm, for anyone who requires confirmation, that it is now the largest single real estate transaction completed in this state's history. The room was silent, in the way rooms are silent when everyone is breathing, but no one is making a sound. "The lead name on that contract is mine," she continued. "Ellie Hartwell. Not because I married into this family, because my grandmother believed in a 19-year-old girl from Tennessee and pressed something small in gold into her hand and told her not to put it down until she had built something that couldn't be taken. She paused. I built it. It took 11 years, and I did every part of it myself, quietly, while some people in this room were forming opinions about what I was worth. She turned her eyes to Margaret, not with fire, not with bitterness, with the clear, level gaze of a woman who has moved past the place where the wound lives and arrived somewhere that feels like solid ground. My daughter, Ellie said, and her voice softened on that word in a way that made several women in the room reach for something to hold. A glass, a clutch, a partner's arm is a billionaire before she takes her first breath, before anyone in this family has the chance to decide whether she is enough. She let that sit for one breath. Then, one more thing. She looked at the room. The chandeliers, the ballroom walls, the windows with the city spread below them. The Meridian Grand Hotel, the building we are standing in right now. A pause. Closed escrow on Thursday morning. It is part of the portfolio. Daniel almost smiled. He caught himself. He was a professional. You have been holding your gala, Ellie said simply, in my building. Complete silence. She set the microphone down on the stand, gently, with care, not a slam. The gesture of someone who has said everything that needed to be said and has no interest in performing the aftermath. She lifted her wrist. The gold bracelet caught the chandelier light and sent a small, warm pulse of gold across the nearest table. She looked at James. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has lost and is only now standing in the ballroom of a hotel that belongs to his wife, beginning to understand the full dimensions of what the loss actually is. There was nothing in his face that she needed from him anymore. She turned. She walked back toward the double doors the same way she had come in, steady, unhurried. Daniel and the two partners fell into step beside her. The doors opened. She walked through. The doors closed behind her. The room stayed quiet for a very long time after that. By Sunday morning, the story had moved through their social and professional circles the way certain stories do. Not because anyone had made a public statement, but because there had been over 90 people in that ballroom, and each of them had gone home to someone who had asked how the evening went. By Monday morning, 3 of James's major business contacts had left messages with his assistant, not congratulatory messages, quiet, careful messages, asking questions about the Whitmore family's actual business holdings, about the nature of various ongoing contracts, about what exactly the Whitmore name was worth when measured against what Ellie had built independently over 11 years. The Whitmore name had always carried a certain comfortable weight in their circles, the borrowed weight of people who had been in the right rooms long enough that no one had thought to examine the foundation too carefully. But now there was a different number in the conversation, a real number, and it had Ellie's name on it, not theirs. The professional consequences were not dramatic. They didn't need to be. One client redirected a major contract renewal to a development firm that had been affiliated with Ellie's portfolio for the past 2 years. Another postponed a scheduled meeting and then never rescheduled it. A third called personally and said all the right things, and then sent a follow-up email that said something noticeably different. James read the email at his desk and then read it again. Nobody said Ellie's name when they did any of these things. They didn't have to. Caroline disappeared the week after the gala. She stopped appearing at Sunday dinners, stopped sending messages through Margaret, simply ceased to be a presence in the way that people who were never truly invested tend to leave, without ceremony, with the efficiency of someone who has already relocated every piece of herself to a different address. Within the month, she was photographed at a charity event uptown on the arm of someone in finance, laughing with the full openness of a woman who had moved on so completely that the previous chapter might as well have been written by someone else. James called her twice. She didn't answer. He did not call a third time. Margaret left a voicemail on a Tuesday afternoon that was the longest message Ellie had received in years. 9 minutes and 40 seconds. It began with family, moved carefully through the baby, touched the word misunderstanding with surgical precision, using it the way people use it when they mean I was wrong, but cannot bring themselves to pay the full cost of that admission. It ended with love. The word love placed at the conclusion with the deliberateness of a period someone has been thinking about for several paragraphs. Ellie listened to the entire message, standing at her kitchen window, watching the light move across the backyard. Then she set her phone face down on the counter. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat down and drank it slowly. She did not call back, and she felt no guilt about that. That was the part that surprised her a little. Not the decision itself, but the clean absence of guilt around it. She had spent years softening her own responses in rooms where no one was softening theirs for her. She had been gracious in the face of things that did not deserve grace, and told herself that was strength. But there was a different kind of strength she was learning now, the kind that knows the difference between forgiveness and access. Forgiveness was hers to give, in her own time, in her own way. But access was different. Margaret had lost hers. That was not cruelty. That was simply a door closing on a chapter that was finished. Ellie had moved out of the family home quietly and with very little. She took what was hers and left what she had never needed. She moved into the east side apartment she had owned for 4 years, the one with the east-facing windows that filled the bedroom with morning light. It was not large. It was hers. And it was quiet in the particular way of a place that belongs entirely to one person. She painted the nursery there too, the same soft sage green. She moved the crib and the bookshelf and the mobile with the hand-painted birds. She set the rocking chair in the corner by the window. She hung a single photograph above the crib. Ruth Hartwell, sitting on the porch in Tennessee, silver hair, summer light, hands folded in her lap, looking at something just past the camera with the expression of a woman who knows exactly what she has built and is perfectly content to let it exist without anyone's applause. James came to the door on a Thursday evening. He knocked once. Ellie heard it from inside. She stood still for a moment with her hand on the wall and her eyes closed. 1 breath, 2 breaths. 2, then she went to the door. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been living for several weeks inside the consequences of his own choices and was beginning to understand their full dimensions. He had lost weight. There was something in his face that hadn't been there before. Not quite shame, but the early arrival of it, something just before the full reckoning. He looked at her belly, at her wrist, at her face. "I'm sorry," he said, low and even. She believed that he meant it. In the way a person means something when they have run out of other options, and the truth is the only thing left that hasn't already been used. Ellie looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way you look at a chapter you have already finished reading, with the recognition of someone who remembers every word but is no longer living inside it. "I know," she said, and she closed the door, not with anger, not with satisfaction, gently, the way you close something that is over. The divorce papers were filed the following morning. Her attorney handled the process with the same quiet efficiency Ellie had always preferred. There were no dramatic scenes in hallways, no contested arguments over things that didn't matter. Ellie was precise about what she wanted and clear about what she didn't, and the whole of it was settled faster than most people would have expected. She didn't cry during any of it. She was too busy painting the nursery ceiling. There is a particular kind of woman who does not fight back in the moment, not because she cannot, but because she has already calculated the full distance between where she stands and where the ending is. And she understands that the fastest route between those 2 points is not the loudest one. Ellie had been that kind of woman since she was 19 years old, sitting on a porch in Tennessee, listening to someone who loved her tell her the only truth she would ever truly need. In the weeks after the gala, while the professional and social landscape around the Whitmore name continued its quiet realignment, Ellie moved through her days with a steadiness that surprised even herself. She set up the nursery in the new apartment. She reorganized the acquisition documents. She had 3 calls with the senior partners at the firm about the integration of the Meridian portfolio. She ate breakfast every morning at the window, watching the light, thinking about her daughter. She thought about names. Ruth, obviously, was the first one that arrived. Ruth Eleanor. The weight of it felt right. 2 women, different generations, the same insistence on building something real in a world that was always ready to tell you what you were worth and almost always wrong about the number. She thought about the quilt that had gone into the trash bag, her coworker's handmade quilt, 3 weekends of work, a gift made from love and time, neither of which can be replaced. She had called her coworker the morning after the shower and said simply, "That quilt deserved better than what happened to it. I'm sorry you had to be in that room." Her coworker had said, "Ellie, I already made her a second one." That had undone her a little, in the good way. She thought about the actionable lessons, not as abstract wisdom, but as the concrete, practiced, daily decisions that had made the difference between who she had become and who she might have been if she had put the bracelet down when things got difficult. If you are building something, she thought, build it like no one is watching, because the watching is what changes people. The watching is what makes builders into performers and performers into people who have forgotten what they were originally making. If someone is taking inventory of your life without your permission, cataloging what you own, measuring what you're worth, deciding what you deserve, that is not love. That is assessment. Know the difference. Love does not require an audit. And the last one, the one that had come to her sitting on the bathroom floor after Dr. Wells' call, the one that had lifted her to her feet. The moment you decide to stand up is not the moment everything gets better. It is the moment everything becomes real. And real, even when it is hard, is always better than the performance of fine. She had been performing fine for a long time. She was done with that particular role. 3 weeks before her due date, Ellie went back to Tennessee for a weekend. Her parents' house, the same driveway, the same kitchen that smelled like coffee, and the particular warmth of a house that has been lived in by the same people for decades. Frank Hartwell had fixed the screen door. Linda had put new curtains in the guest room, yellow ones that let the morning light through in a soft, diffused way that made the room feel like the inside of something kind. They sat on the back porch in the evenings, the 3 of them, and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. Frank told the story again about driving to Ellie's college graduation. The car, the oil, the best clothes they owned, the moment they saw her walk across that stage. He always told it the same way. He always got to the part where Linda grabbed his arm in the stands and he had to pretend he wasn't crying, and then he laughed in the embarrassed, delighted way of a man who is not actually embarrassed at all. Ellie sat between them on the porch in the evening light, her hands on her belly, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt exactly like herself. On the last morning, before she drove back to the city, she walked out to the edge of the property. The old back fence, the long grass, the view out toward the hills that hadn't changed in her entire life. She stood there for a while. She thought about Ruth, walking this same ground, paying the taxes on land that no one else was looking at, believing in the long, slow math of patience, knowing that the thing built quietly is the thing that lasts. She put her hand on the fence post. She looked out at the hills. "I hear you," she said quietly. "I've always heard you." The wind moved through the grass. The morning light was soft and level. Somewhere on the property, a bird was going through its whole catalog, not performing for anyone, just moving through the fullness of what it had to say. Ellie stood there until she was ready. Then she got in her car and drove back to the city to have her daughter. The hospital room, on the morning of Ruth Eleanor's birth, was quiet and warm, and the light came through the window in long pale bars that crossed the floor and the bed and made everything in the room look like it had been washed gently and set out to dry. Ellie was holding her daughter. The baby was small in the way all new people are small, impossibly, startlingly small, like the universe had compressed something enormous into the smallest possible form and handed it over and was now standing back to see what would happen next. She had a full head of dark hair. Her hands were barely larger than the first joint of Ellie's thumb. Her eyes were open and dark and wide, and she was looking at Ellie with the particular intensity of someone meeting, for the first time, the face they had been listening to for 9 months. Ellie brought her close. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and stayed there, not moving, not speaking, not thinking about acquisition timelines or divorce proceedings or boardrooms or any of the 1,000 things that had filled the past 9 months of her life. She was here, in this room, with this child, with the full, unhurried weight of a love that had been building longer than any business deal and was worth more than any number she had ever signed beside. Her mother was in the corner chair crying without trying to stop, both hands pressed together in front of her face, her whole body shaking slightly, with the particular good crying that happens when something you have prayed for finally arrives and is exactly what you hoped it would be. Frank was standing beside her with his hand over his mouth. He had driven up the night before, oil changed this time, Linda had insisted, and had sat in the hospital waiting room for 4 hours without a single complaint, because his daughter was on the other side of a door and he was going to be there when it opened. He was a man who laid hardwood floors for a living and drove a car that needed the oil changed and wore his best clothes to graduations and waited for 4 hours in plastic chairs for his daughter, because that was simply what you did when you loved someone. That was the whole of it. Ellie looked up at them both. She smiled. It was the first smile in months that did not require any decision. It arrived entirely on its own, from somewhere deep and uncomplicated, from the place in her that had existed before all of it. Before James. Before the portfolio, before the gala. Before the trash bag and the nursery and the bathroom floor. The place that was just a girl on a Tennessee porch being told she was worth something by someone who meant every word. She looked back down at her daughter. Ruth Eleanor looked back at her with those wide, serious, just-arrived eyes. The eyes of someone who has not yet learned to perform anything and is therefore showing you exactly what they are. Ellie reached for the gold bracelet on the nightstand beside the bed. She held it for a moment between her fingers, feeling its weight, its warmth, the 15 years it had spent on her wrist through dormitory rooms and architecture studios and late nights and early mornings and every quiet hour of building, through the baby shower and the nursery and the night she had retrieved it from a black trash bag before anyone else was awake and cleaned it with a soft cloth and held it in the dark. She thought about the porch, the rocking chair, the orange evening sky. Her grandmother's hands pressing something small and gold into a 19-year-old girl's palm, with the full weight of 3.5 decades of patient, deliberate, quietly extraordinary faith. She looked at her daughter's wrist, tiny, perfect. She fastened the bracelet around it very gently. The way you handle something that is both delicate and, in its essential nature, absolutely unbreakable. The bracelet was loose on the small wrist, the way her grandmother's bracelet had been loose on Ellie's wrist in the beginning. It would be years before Ruth Eleanor grew into it, but it sat there, gold and warm and present, as though it had always been on its way to exactly this wrist and had simply been passing through Ellie's on the way. "Don't take this off," Ellie whispered. Her voice was low enough that only her daughter could hear it, and her daughter looked at her with those wide, ancient, just-arrived eyes. "Not until you've built something that can't be taken from you. Something yours, baby." She paused. "You hear me?" The morning light moved across the room in the particular way that light moves when it has nowhere to rush. Frank had taken his hand from his mouth. He was smiling now, the way a man smiles when he has watched his child become something he doesn't quite have the words for, and has decided that the absence of the words doesn't matter, because what he is feeling is larger than language anyway. Linda had stopped crying. She was just watching her daughter, holding her granddaughter in the morning light, and her face had the expression of a woman who has arrived at the end of a very long journey and found exactly what she was hoping would be there. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do in the early morning. Waking up, making its ordinary noise, moving through its ordinary hours, without any awareness of what was happening in this room. Somewhere in a glass tower on the west side, the Meridian portfolio documentation was being finalized by a team of attorneys. Somewhere on the east side, the apartment with the morning windows was waiting with its sage green nursery and its photograph of Ruth Hartwell on the Tennessee porch. And in this room, in the quiet center of all of it, Ellie sat, holding her daughter. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, that everything was exactly as it should be. Not perfect, not without cost, not without the particular grief that comes from loving someone who turned out to be smaller than you needed them to be, but right, real, hers. She had built it, quietly, steadily, one layer at a time, the way her grandmother had taught her, without knowing she was teaching anything at all, just by doing it. Just by pressing a bracelet into a girl's hand and saying something true. There is a kind of woman the world consistently underestimates. The world mistakes her patience for weakness. It mistakes her silence for surrender. It looks at her sitting quietly at the center of a room and sees nothing worth paying attention to, and it carries on with its business of deciding what everyone is worth and who deserves to stay. And it is wrong. It is wrong in the particular way that people are wrong when they have been looking at something carefully and still failing to see it, when they have been so certain of their own assessment that they never thought to check whether the ground they were standing on belonged to someone else. Ellie Hartwell had always been the kind of woman who built in the quiet. She had been building since a summer evening in Tennessee, since a bracelet was pressed into her palm, since someone looked at her and said, "Something yours, baby," and meant it with the full gravity of everything they had ever worked for. Everything they tried to take from her came back. It always does. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.